Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to the NBA, college basketball to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source, from touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks. BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. So we're continuing to look at Penn State acquiring Jim Knowles as its new defensive coordinator, stealing the reigning national champion Ohio State Buckeyes defensive coordinator in one of the most fascinating stories of the offseason at this point, and that very few, myself included, ever expected Penn State to make this aggressive of a move to go and get a defensive coordinator after Tom Allen had left for Clemson. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at what the defense could look like under Jim Knowles, and also the move itself, getting Justin King's first comments on the situation, plus Penn State retaining safeties coach, co-defensive coordinator Anthony Poindexter. That was a huge move that I think needs to be highlighted. There's so much to evaluate and process with this because the story of the hire is really fascinating. But at your first glance, Justin, when you saw this news break, what was your reaction?
I mean, I think like anybody else, just excited and surprised, to be honest with you. You don't really see, well, I guess as of recent, you do see inter conference transitions, or I like to say lateral moves from coaching staffs, which you typically didn't see before. But with Chip Kelly, going from head coach to offensive coordinator and now D coordinator at, comparative schools it's pretty interesting to see. But it goes back to what we mentioned about not being worried about James's ability to fill this position, especially just in his history of hiring a staff. So, again, I think that's another notch on his belt there. And we talk about talent acquisition. That's a huge, acquisition of talent when you talk about, top defensive coordinator in the country. So hopefully, they continue to protect that foundation of what the program seems to be built on is strong defense, and you bring somebody else to kind of coordinate that. So yeah, it's exciting and surprising.
It's definitely surprising for a lot of reasons. The story that has been out there on social media and reported, and some of it is hearsay, those sorts of things, about how Jim Knowles was, I guess, disrespected by Ohio State is the word to look at, but also it sounded like after the national championship or sometime during the season, it was clear that he was not going to want to stay at Ohio State and just wanted to move on in some capacity. Brett McMurphy put this out on social media. He said, quote, Ohio State DC Jim Knowles was asked by the school, Ohio State, not to attend the Buckeyes national title celebration while he deliberated his options, source said. Knowles' representation tried to reach a deal with Ohio State the week before the national championship game and immediately after, but eventually an offer was, quote, well below the competition. Source said Knowles signed a 3-year, $9.3 million deal with Penn State. So it's kind of fascinating, and there's a story out there from Knowles' fiance as well about the real inner workings of this situation. And again, take this with a grain of salt, but this was also posted on social media, the words directly from Andy Kennedy, quote, so first off, they would not allow him to go to the celebration unless he signed their contract for $2.75 million. He asked to let him celebrate with his players, and they said no. Oklahoma and Notre Dame both offered Knowles $3 million, Penn State $3.1 million, and Ohio State $2.75. Slap in his face, they knew the other offers. And all this stuff about Larry Johnson and Ryan Day, Jim started playing his defense after the Oregon game, not Larry Johnson's. So there's some information in here that's kind of interesting in that, like we've talked about it before, that loss to Oregon earlier on in the season was definitely a pivot point for the Buckeyes this season. You lose by 1 in the final seconds on the road in a hell of a game. So there's this discussion out there that Knowles maybe wasn't getting to do what he wanted to do, or after that game, it was like, whose defense was he running? Was it Larry Johnson's? And you understand LJ Sr. very well. Did Ryan Day take over more in the defense? And Knowles was like, hey, I just don't want to put up with this. But what do you think of this? It's a lot of hearsay.
I mean, you got to think college coaching, or just coaching staffs in general, you got a lot of interpersonal relationships and personalities along with egos that have to mesh for a long time. And when you go through, different ups and downs, like, I don't know, like, if they had any friction in there, but I mean, it's normal amongst players and coaches amongst coaches, like they had a great season the year before and everybody was trying to get the quarterback out of there, which they end up doing, right? So the same thing, we have a coordinator, like we were spending 12 to 14 hours a day with everybody, regardless of doing your job and how successful it is, that value is placed, from there. Like, so it's not surprising. Sometimes you like think of the fallacy of like, hey, if everybody's winning, don't fix it. If it's not broken, things of that nature, they win a national championship. But it's like, hey, like, relationships are real, and you have to coach with people, regardless of like respect and how you, conduct your business. Again, you're spending a lot of time with these guys, so I mean, it happens in the business, and not surprised by that part or those reports.
Does that clear to you that LJ Sr. was more in charge of the defense than his title would have suggested?
I mean, he's a well-respected coach in college football. I don't know if you get into the drama series of like who was calling who's like what plays. I think his defensive line, the Rushmen, have been a critical part of their defensive presence in Ohio and Columbus for the past 10 years since he's been there, especially closing out the games, whether it's playing basic coverages, stunts up front, type of blitzes, or however you move their different mismatches around that they've had up front. But I don't know if it's his overall defense per se. You know what I mean? So I think there can be some truth and gray area and all that. So, I mean, it's hard to, stipulate or come to any speculations of anything.
Right. And again, take this with a grain of salt. This is all stuff that's out there on social media. Again, the accounting I'm giving you now is from Andy Kennedy, the fiance of Jim Knowles. So the rest of that accounting went as such. Once he, Knowles, did not agree to the 2.75, it was 10:30 at night, and they told him he'd be locked out of the building at midnight. He, Knowles, even said, if you let me come and celebrate with the players, I'll just nod, smile, and shake hands. They, Ohio State, said no, it would take away from the celebration. Idiots. Him not coming took away. I'm 99% sure they are who broke the story of him going to Penn State, because they said he told his players the night before he was coming back. Not true. You go where you are wanted, period. I'm so angry about all the stuff out there about him. So again, take this with a grain of salt. This was put out there on social media. Whether any of this or some of it or all of it is accurate is up for your interpretation. It sounds like there were some feathers that were ruffled. Ultimately, in the last few days, Jim Knowles has been introduced formally as the defensive coordinator for Penn State football. He is a Philly guy, grew up watching Penn State football. So he mentioned multiple times, I was like, this is a dream job for him. Doesn't hurt that Penn State put on average $3.1 million per year on the table and exceeded offers from Notre Dame and Oklahoma. I think that's the real interesting thing in this. And then the episode I did this past Sunday, I was feeling, Justin, and I'm curious how you feel, that this is an indicator of one of two things. Either one, Penn State is going all in for a national title in 2025, or two, it's an indicator that Penn State is now prepared to spend at a higher level long-term to credibly compete at the national championship level. Which do you think it is?
I mean, I think it's just a matter of protecting the foundation in which you built your program on, right? It's championship ready based on the defense that they've had, whether it's changing from Manny Diaz to Tom Allen, the different players like that go to the NFL and things of that nature has been based on the defensive structure. So I think of building a skyscraper. If you have to like replace or fix the foundation, you have to put a lot of value in that. So I don't know if it means anything of the options that you gave me from the standpoint of all in or being willing to spend. I think it's acknowledging that the defense is a critical piece of this whole program and how things operate. And you can't let the piece of the program that we essentially not to say take for granted, but that we're built off of falter. So you have to put an elite coach in that place to be able to retain the recruits, to be able to call the defense that you need to call, so forth and so on. So I think it's more of the identity of Penn State remaining at the top when it comes to that defensive prowess. So, I mean, does it suggest that they're willing to spend and things of that nature? I think they've always shown that they're willing to spend on things that they value. It's all, you know what I mean? Like James gets paid a lot of money and like coaches get like paid, and we're spending $700 million on a stadium close to $1 billion. So like, it's not about what people like are willing to spend. It's what they value and where they want to throw that money. So I think this is just another notch in that bucket of valuing defensive coaches, like an elite coaching staff, to be honest. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you've described it very well in the past few seasons, in that Penn State's been playing money ball, not as many resources, and doing a lot with it. Obviously getting to the Final Four of the college football playoff with not as many resources as some of the juggernaut blue bloods of the sport was extremely impressive. So it's kind of like, hey, if there was an infusion of cash and resources into this program, imagine where they could go. And there was proof of productivity and performance by going that deep into the college football playoff. So that's going to be my question long term is, was this all chips to the center, hoping that you win one in 2025? Or is this going to be a sign of like, hey, in 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, we're spending maybe not at this exact same clip, but you're doing it with coaches, you're doing it with players, you're prepared to invest in a substantial capacity, because you and I talk about all the time, Jimmy's and Joe's versus X's and O's. Okay, you've shored up the X's and O's. This is, on paper, one of the best coaching staffs in America, maybe the greatest offensive and defensive coordinator combination in the country, period. Now the question shifts towards the personnel, because you can look at what Jim Knowles is capable of as a play caller, play designer, coordinator, coach. All that stuff is fantastic. However, look at the personnel he had to work with at Ohio State compared to what he's now inheriting at Penn State. It's not a tremendous drop-off. You're losing some guys to the National Football League. Abdul Carter is the first one that jumps to mind, and plenty of other pieces. There's going to be questions within this defensive unit of which personnel take that step and take the reins and really step up as starters in 2025. But let me start with this. What do you think of Jim Knowles, the coach, the coordinator, his style of defense?
I mean, I think it's been proven in the sense of he has a successful way of coaching. Right. It's one thing of coaching successful players or talented players at Ohio State, because I think there's a value in that as well. Deploying talent is something that's always underrated, because we just think talent operates, but putting talent in the right position, mentally keeping talent sharp, mentally keeping talent, wanting to strive for more, like those different type of things, and relinquishing them to play a certain type of manner, like that is a skill set and a coach of itself. So he has that background. The evidence of impact that he's had as a defensive coordinator is evident, right? Just from what they've done, regardless of how they call the games. I think when it comes down to fitting in with Penn State, I think I don't even really think there's a drop off at all when it comes to talent. I mean, from the standpoint of who he had last year, I would say that Penn State's defense was probably more if not talented at the same clip, or if not more talented than the Ohio State defense was last year. When you talk about like a top 3 draft pick with Abdul being in there, and then guys, whatever that may look like. But again, I don't think there's a drop off at all. Like for him transitioning over to Penn State, I think it just brings another layer of, brain trust within that building to get up out of the Big Ten next year and make it back to the playoffs and deeper next year.
State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. There are only 3 defensive coordinators at the NFL level that are making more money per year than Jim Knowles will be making at Penn State. It's a substantial investment on that side. Especially amongst coordinators. In terms of what Jim Knowles is inheriting with the personnel, we mentioned Abdul Carter's off to the National Football League. Could be a top 5 pick. KJ Winston, Jalen Reed, Kobe King, defensive tackle Devontae Thomas. A little shallow at defensive tackle now that some guys have graduated and are off to the National Football League. You're going to have to see what the safety position looks like now with King Mack coming back, Zakee Wheatley coming back. Jalen Kimber's off to the National Football League. So there's just that natural churn of the offseason. I believe in the depth in the secondary. I believe in the depth in the linebacker room. Tony Rojas is going to have to step up and probably be the guy at middle linebacker, and there'll be some competition there at other spots. Defensive tackle feels a little shallow. Very curious to see who is the guy opposite Denai Dennis Sutton at defensive end. We've talked a lot about Zariah Fisher. There's Anai White, the transfer from Texas A&M, who is more of a long-term project. Max Granville, the freshman who came in and played substantial snaps last year. Is he somebody who could take that leap and be that starter next year? Is it platooned? That sort of thing. Does the pass rush feel the same? So there's a lot of elements within the personnel for the defense that you have to look at and see how they perform in 2025. If anything, knowing what Jim Knowles is capable of, is there a certain position group that you see him really being able to amplify over his history in college football?
Amplify? No, I don't know if it's a matter of amplifying anything on the defense. I mean, it's one of those things where if it's not broke, don't fix it. Yeah, I mean, and I think all of them playing out of clip. I think we just talked about turnovers from a standpoint. I don't know how much you coach that, but I mean, whether it's targeting players coming out of high school or anything of that nature, I think just his experience adds a layer of just best practices in the building. So, I mean, I'm not sure if elevating is the thing I'm talking about. Like Tom Allen, Manny Diaz, like they're pretty damn good coaches.
Brent Pry, give him his flowers as well.
And my guy Pry as well.
To go from Pry to Diaz to Allen to Knowles is pretty ridiculous. And I'm still surprised, Justin, by this level of spending. But at the same time, I don't think I should be, because Pat Kraft has made it very clear for years that he's prepared to be very aggressive as an athletic director. So this type of financial investment for a coordinator is monumental in the grand scheme of Penn State football. I said it this past Sunday. I don't think this hire guarantees Penn State anything. Mm-hmm. Nothing's guaranteed. There's still a lot of things that have to fall into place, but you do feel very strongly about Penn State's chances to credibly compete and possibly win a national championship in 2025. This coordinator tandem, Kotelnicki and Knowles, what do you think of that?
I mean, I think it's exciting, right? I think on paper it's probably the best coordinator tandem in the country. Again, it's every year this is a prove it type of league. You have to go out and prove it. But I mean, yeah, the horsepower is there. Like this, I mean, expectations are going to continue to rise going into the offseason. But there's nothing more to make. I mean, this is the second year of Kotelnicki, and we know what Jim Knowles is. So I think it's quite evident that this is a duo that we've never seen probably in college football from the standpoint of expectations going into the season. So, it's again, coaches don't make plays at the end of the day. So we'll see how it all operates going into the season.
Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's. We should put that on a t-shirt at some point. In terms of coaches, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning. Anthony Poindexter was retained. I think this is going to fly under the radar a little bit in terms of getting headlines or anything. That is a huge piece of this coaching staff. And to retain Anthony Poindexter is enormous. He could have gone on to have been the head coach at Virginia a few years ago, his alma mater. So he is obviously somebody who is respected within coaching circles and can do some tremendous things. So just because he is listed as a co-defensive coordinator and as the guy in charge of safeties, that doesn't mean, oh, he's just a position coach or anything like that. Can you articulate the value of Anthony Poindexter to this coaching staff?
I mean, to single out any coach, I mean, I think that they all like kind of they fit, right? But when you have a guy that's coaching a position that played it at an elite level, talk about college Hall of Famer, and is a decorated coach, you're bringing a unique perspective to the game from a teaching standpoint, from a relational standpoint, from just a complete familiarity with being on the field, right? There's one thing of like learning the game from an X's and O's. We see it amongst the crowds of the analytics and the football traditionalists, right? And I mean, they stand on that. He can be kind of one of those guys that's both when you talk about developing a player, coaching, and bringing the attitude that needed to play successful football at that safety position, and just bringing that attitude, I mean, into the brain trust of the defensive coordinator room. I think when you look at Penn State's defensive coordinator, I mean, the defensive staff, you got Deion Barnes that played football at a high level. You got Dan Carter, Buckus Award winner. You got my pops, Terry Smith, played at a high level at Penn State, top receiver. You got Anthony Poindexter. He's a college Hall of Famer. Like, these guys have all done it at a high level on defense. So there's no limitations when it comes to deploying talent or how they view talent, and just an overall alignment in how football should be played. And then how we translate that to defense is one thing. So like, I think when you put all those pieces together, he fits in well, and it just goes to show like James has elite staff building, talent. I mean, when it comes to that.
Why do you think that is with James? Just personal relationships?
I think it's personal relationships, being proactive, and I think he's the true essence of people when they say like a head coach is a CEO. He is that, right? So when a CEO is doing succession planning, I know James is very diligent about evaluating coaches that are up next, or who's in the landscape, who's doing well, and just always collecting information. We always think about like, okay, what is intelligence or all those different type of things? But he's a guy that can take in a lot of information from a lot of different places and categorize it in a way that can be beneficial from a talent acquisition standpoint on the field, from recruiting and from the staff members, and where they fit in which you need in a football staff, whether it's the guy that does the schedules and super organized from the operational standpoint, to the guy that deals with the problem child player that has to get them underlined, to the guy that gets the player super tough. I think there's a whole gambit of personalities that make a football building work, and to be able to organize and put people in the right positions to handle that is one of his elite traits as a leader of a football team. I mean, like, he's probably, of all the coaches that I've been around, he's given Nick Saban the title of being a commissioner. I think he would be the best athletic director in college sports, period, if he transitioned into that. That's just kind of how he operates when you deal with him versus my experience with other head coaches. I mean, that's why I think he does a great job of hiring staffs.
To round this out, James Franklin, I think, needs to get his flowers regarding this hire. Clearly, for years, he has been bagged on by this fan base at times, and by college football fans, period. The media can't win the big game, all that sort of stuff. And I'll raise my hand as one of the first people to be very critical of James Franklin over the years. It feels like the 2024, now 2025 cycle changed the feeling surrounding James Franklin, and that I personally saw the growth of him as a game manager, someone within the game making the best decisions. And I think part of that came with better coordinators, better personnel. You have answers to the questions that are posed within a game, and making the right decision at the right time, having the right play at the right time. I point towards the Minnesota game. While that certainly ticked me off as a fan in the moment, the fake punt and the handoff to Luke Reynolds to continue the game was a gutsy call, and a lot of different circumstances where Penn State made better decisions in one possession games, fourth down situations, field position situations, all those sorts of things. I saw market improvement from that. And then being able to make it to the Final Four of the college football playoff, people have certainly knocked the path of SMU and Boise State. I get that. You won the games that were put in front of you, and then you were a field goal away from beating Notre Dame and going to the national championship game this year. In your opinion, has the feeling and the narrative surrounding James Franklin shifted, and are people finally starting to appreciate what he is?
Do I think the narrative shifted? I mean, he finished in the top 5. I think everybody can acknowledge, a successful season. I think that's where we're at. I think it's just the people who, I guess, when quote unquote haters, there's probably don't have anything to say at this very moment. But we'll hear the rumblings. Especially it's going to transition into like the expectations with the best coordinators. So there's no excuses, or even like the storyline of now that they're spending money, they don't do this, or even like the thing that, and I heard Pat McAfee say like the alumni's all in, and it's like that's like a facade to an extent, because it's based on like what the numbers say in terms of what the collective has brought in and what guys are getting paid. I think they're doing a great job at operating a football team, and people don't understand what that looks like and think it's just money, and people are throwing money at the thing, and it kind of alleviates the actual talent to operate in this business. And I think it's more of that than it is just total like cash dump into fixing problems. You know what I mean? I think that's all.
To that point, I love the hire for so many reasons, because it was kind of one of those things of like, we saw a lot of people be like, Penn State should go get Jim Knowles. It was like, yeah, you should go get Andy Reid to be your offensive coordinator. Like, yeah, duh, of course. So it's like amazing that they did it. And it's not just, to your point, throwing money at the problem and hope that it gets fixed. It was the right hire. It was the best possible perfect hire. So now, again, I hope, as someone who covers the team and has been a fan of the team and alum of the university, I hope to see that this is a indicator and sign of future spending. That you're doing this. Are you now going to do this with players? Are you going to do this in the transfer portal? Because like we've seen all the reports out there of Jeremiah Smith, somebody trying to get him to jump into the portal for $4.5 million, but then like your yearly salary cap, quote unquote, is like $20 million. So now you're playing the salary cap game the GMs at the NFL level have to play with. So it's like, okay, if this is the value for some of these alpha game-changing players, you were prepared to do this for a coach. Are you prepared to do that for a player? Time will tell. Thank you all for joining us here on State of State. Jim Knowles is the new defensive coordinator for Penn State football, and this could be a big year for the Nittany Lions in 2025. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.